The Alfa Romeo Giulia Quadrifoglio is one of the most coveted and revered cars amongst true enthusiasts, and that's not only because it's gorgeous, and it's not only because it has a twin turbocharged V6 under the bonnet, it's because it's teaching BMW and Mercedes a thing or two about performance cars. There's a brand new 2020 model out with a few tweaks and revisions to help improve the overall package, but that is not this car. This is a pre-facelift model, and it's here today to arguably answer a more important question, which is, should you buy one used? Now, the thing that kicked all of this off was that the other night I was online fantasy car shopping, like many of us do, and I thought, oh, how much does a Quadrifoglio go for these days? And I was shocked to find some examples approaching £30,000. Now, considering that this car is about 67 new without options, that is a lot of bellissima for your lira. And it got me thinking, should you buy used? I mean, clearly it is a beautiful, beautiful machine that has been sculpted as opposed to milled by a machine. It's full of curves. It gets rid of a lot of these really angry, aggressive creases that BMW M cars seem to have at the moment. It's muscular and curvaceous and organic, and not only do I think that makes it a handsome machine, but actually one of the best looking saloon cars on sale today. I mean, you have to be a real true Alfisti to spot the differences between the pre-facelift and the 2020 cars. Okay, so that was beauty. How about beast under the bonnet? Because that 2.9 litre twin turbocharged V6 is something quite special. And of course, we all know that it had nothing to do with Ferrari engineers whatsoever. It is a magnificent power unit, producing about 503 brake horsepower and 443 pounds-feet of torque. Now, in the UK, we only get a rear-wheel drive Giulia Quadrifoglio. In Europe, you can have an all-wheel drive one. It's just to do with the packaging and moving the steering wheel over to the right-hand side. Our rear-wheel drive cars, nevertheless, will still crack 0 to 62 miles per hour in just 3.9 seconds, and do it in arguably one of the most theatrical of fashions. Glorious V6 soundtrack builds and builds, and with the relative lack of turbo lag and torque available low down in the rev range, it's really responsive as well. It's got an almost, I suppose, elastic quality to it as you fire yourself off down the road at quite a rate of knots. I mean, there's no denying this is a fast car. And I think part of the drama being that soundtrack is a key ingredient to this. So many other cars in this class are a bit muted, or in the case of something like the BMW M3 where its sound is so synthesized, this is somehow keeping in touch with that analog reality that we all love as car enthusiasts. It sounds absolutely fantastic, and it's narrated the whole way through by little whip cracks from the exhaust as the gearbox changes. And I have to give props actually to this 7-speed automatic transmission here. It's super slick when left to its own devices, but the perfect conductor via these large aluminium paddles whenever you do decide to switch gears yourself. Now, just like the Stelvio Quadrifoglio, or in fact most other Alfa Romeos, this car's mood is dictated by this DNA dial down here. Now, you select A and that's its most fuel efficient mode. The car can actually deactivate cylinders to help save fuel, and you know, the throttle responsiveness is dulled, and it's the car in its most docile state really. I say save fuel, I mean on our best behaviour we've got about 26, 27 mpg out of the car, which I guess isn't bad. But for me, I find the throttle to just be a bit too soft, a bit too sluggish. I usually leave it in N, which is its natural state whenever it wakes up, whenever you fire the car up. Throttle response sort of comes back a bit more, and the car just feels a little bit less lazy. And I think, to be frank, you've got 503 brake horsepower under your right foot. I don't think you bought this car to be a Honda E. From the perspective of driving the car every day, actually the engineers have got the suspension balance just right, I think. It's obviously firm, there's a sporty element to it, but in its regular setting, actually it's perfectly compliant with British roads. There's a nice level of damping, the car sort of flows and ebbs with the road, and it seems to absorb the worst of sort of the lumps and impacts from the tarmac pretty well. Obviously there's a firmer setting for the suspension, but clipping along on British roads, I'd say that's probably just a tad too firm. It's nice that Alfa Romeo give you the ability to dial that back even when the car is in its more aggressive modes. Visibility is pretty good all around, and you do get a reversing camera. When you do click it into D for dynamic, you start to understand why people rave about the Quadrifoglio. It really comes to life. The steering sharpens up, the throttle response increases, the engine is on its highest alert level, and of course that gearbox is giving you some pretty quick responses too. But beyond just being fast and responsive and sounding amazing, there's something quite special about the way this thing goes through the bends, because you feel so plugged in, you feel so in tune with the amount of communication that's coming from the chassis, that's coming back through the steering, that driving it is almost done on a subconscious level. You get into a real rhythm with this car as you start scything through bends, feeling for the grip, feeling how you can really tailor the car on the throttle thanks to it being rear wheel drive, and that nose being so keen to dart into an apex. The really accurate and natural feeling steering is just the perfect companion for carving up some really challenging tarmac. The Giulia really makes you feel like you're part of the performance process, and that's something that a lot of its competitors are really starting to lose these days. That element of numbness through the steering, that sense of detachment where refinement really comes over driving experience, that's what a lot of BMWs, Audis and Mercedes are starting to feel like these days. The Giulia Quadrifoglio, however, celebrates the fact that there is a human being sat here. You're pulling the levers, you're telling the cogs what to do, and you are enjoying the fact that it's you kissing those apexes. And like I say, the weighting of all the controls here makes everything feel so natural, so intuitive. It's an utter joy to drive quickly, this car. Right, so it's fast and fun, but what else do you need to know if you're genuinely thinking about making this car your daily driver? Well, let's move to the inside, because the drama and design continues with a very sculpted dashboard, all these carbon fibre inlays. I really love how this car's been specified with the tricolor stitching, the two elements of the Italian flag there, and also these carbon seats, which are really nice and supportive, both in terms of performance driving and over longer distances. I really do feel it's worth trying to find a car on the used market that has these seats fitted. They're well worth the extra money. And they also make a really nice centerpiece to the interior. I mean, it's a good looking interior on the surface, though when you do go down a bit lower, there are some harder plastics that really aren't befitting of a car of this car's original sticker price. That said, over time, this sort of negative of, oh, that's a bit of a harsh material to use in a car like this, has actually benefited the Giulia. It stands up to the test of time a bit better than some of the plusher materials of competitors. The car does seat 5 in relative comfort. There's a reasonable amount of space in the outermost seats at the back for adults, though like most cars in this class, you do have that big old transmission hump in the middle for the middle passenger to deal with. Boot space is perfectly good. You can live with that every day, about 480 litres, which is actually more than some of the competition from BMW and Mercedes, though it does lack things like hooks to hang bags and just little amenities that make life a little bit easier, which is a shame. However, the Achilles heel of this interior has to be the infotainment system. I mean, it was criticism that was levelled at this car when it was new, and the passage of time certainly has not improved things. It's not particularly ergonomic, it's a bit clunky. Yes, it was an improvement over what came before in Alfa Romeos or anything from FCA, but it still wasn't the best in class, and frankly, BMW's iDrive walks all over it. The same goes for the rubbery, plasticky switchgear in here. It just hasn't aged well. It looked cheap when the car was new. But the new 2020 model obviously has revisions to this, so that would be one benefit of buying new, is that you get the new improved infotainment system, and all of this switchgear has been swapped out for something of a higher quality. I think really if you're looking for the gold standard in this class for interiors, that trophy belongs to Audi. Now, if you're really doing your homework on this car, I'm sure you have already read the horror stories online in terms of reliability for this car. And whilst a lot of that did involve earlier cars, it wouldn't be an Alfa Romeo without some form of mechanical or electrical issue, would it? Now, a lot of these earlier cars did develop electrical faults primarily due to wiring looms. Now, most of those have been replaced, because if you think about it, cars that have been on the market for a few years have hopefully had that remedial work already done. There was also something about whining differentials as well. Again, hopefully cars of a few years old, that problem's already been picked up and dealers and part suppliers have fixed those already. But that said, even our test car this week decided to flash up an error message to do with the car's active aerodynamics. Now, some people will say that the fragile nature of this car is just part and parcel of Alfa Romeo ownership, and whilst that might be true to a degree, it's comments like that that will see other people just walk off to other brands. Our best advice for you is to buy from a dealer and go for an extended warranty, just to give you that added peace of mind. The only other thing to really note is that Giulia does go through its tyres quite quickly, and that's not just due to previous owners turning the rear ones into smoke. It's to do with the aggressive geometry that this car has and the soft compound of the tyre that it uses. Obviously you can switch those out, but ultimately it's that sticky rubber that really contributes to the way it handles. And frankly, a performance car that dances through the bends like this, I can totally forgive it for coming in for a pit stop a little more regularly. I really do think that now could be the time to buy a Giulia Quadrifoglio, because we're in that right sort of time frame where they're just a few years old now, the depreciation has kicked in, mileage is still relatively low, and some of these are actually still covered by their initial warranty. Now, if you're willing to spend £40,000 to £45,000, you can have one with as little as 15,000 miles on it. And I just think that's the performance bargain we've all been waiting for. Now, we'll very soon have coverage on the 2020 Quadrifoglios, but in the meantime, you can go onto the website and check out this car's written feature, as well as other Quadrifoglios that are for sale on YesAuto.com. In the meantime, I think I'm going to go for another drive. Head to YesAuto.com for the latest car news and reviews, and don't forget to check us out on social media. We're in all the usual places such as Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. Simply search for YesAuto.